I'm Damien Lenihan. I'm the Programme Manager with Senior Line. I suppose over the whole COVID pandemic, it's led to us having to change what we do and how we do it. We had a helpline 10 hours per day, 365 days a year with 180 volunteers, all older people, because it's a peer-to-peer service and it's confidential. It's a listening service for older people, by older people. So that was a huge programme operated by our volunteers, and we were trying to keep on top of them. And after training, which Anne will talk about, there's all the follow-up of keeping them involved and looking after them, I suppose. And we do provide a lot of support. But one of the things that's happened is that the pandemic has meant we didn't have volunteers meeting each other. These older people joined the service because they wanted, after retirement or whatever aspect of their life they were in, they wanted to meet other people, be involved in an organisation. And we seemed to fit the bill for them, and they were able to develop the skills that they felt they had and maybe never used in their working life, but now they had a chance to use it in a different way. So they came to us, we trained them, we put them in place, and suddenly COVID took all that away in many respects, and we now had to ask our volunteers, would you mind being able to work from home?
So I'm Anne Dempsey, and I'm Communications Manager of Third Age. And Senior Line, that we really want to talk about this morning, is a national programme of Third Age, our oldest established programme. And Senior Line began as the inspiration was a project in Italy where older people were befriending older people in the cities in Italy. We heard about it. What we loved about it was the peer aspect, older people being with older people. And we decided we'd transfer it to a telephone service. And at that stage, it was very obvious that a lot of older people had landlines but nobody to talk to. And even though we weren't talking about loneliness as much as we're talking about it now, there wasn't the same understanding. It was very much there. And we began to do some research. We discovered a huge amount of hidden loneliness in Ireland being experienced by older people. So we began Senior Line in a very small way in our national office in Summerhill. And our model at that time was we set up small groups around the country with a coordinator for each group, and the line was switched to each group around the country. So Senior Line is open every day of the year from 10 to 10, and the line was switched every few hours so that all the volunteers in the different centres around the country over a whole week were involved in their hours of duty. And we began opening in a small way. We're now open every day of the year from 10 until 10. So it's a brilliant service. It's open when many statutory services are closed, 10 until 10. Huge commitment from our volunteers who are terrific.
And out of the initial 180 volunteers, 120 stepped up to the mark and have been providing for 2.5 years now the service, working from their own homes, using their own phones. But we have a system, and I suppose that brings me to the technology aspect, which is huge for us. Yeah. We were lucky that Vodafone helped us, developed a program where our calls are being diverted on a scheduled basis. We have very little that we need to do in respect of that, except that we divert it to the different volunteers that are on duty. Volunteers always work 2 at a time together, so this system will divert it to 2 volunteers who will be on duty between 10 and 1, let's say, or 1 to 4, 4 to 7, or 7 till 10 in the evening, and they'll do their duty, and we're always on standby in case they need support during that. But to set that up in the first place, many volunteers had landlines. They had dodgy enough phones, I discovered. And so, because these phones need to be put into the system for it to work properly, a lot of them had difficulties with that. So I became a bit of a techie person during that time and learned how to divert and how to get rid of message machines and all that sort of stuff. But it's working now quite well. We got a grant from an organisation who gave us money to buy phones, and we bought phones, and this in a way took away some of that technological challenge that we had, where I spent hours trying to get things sorted for our volunteers. Now we could just say, listen, I can give you a phone, you can use that, and that was dead. That was dead simple to set up. So that's where we are now. We've got 120 volunteers, and almost 50 of them are using phones that were provided by a grant to keep the service going. Now, what it's also meant is that we've gone away from using our volunteers' landlines, and now we can keep much more in touch with them using a bulk text service that we have. And that meant throughout COVID, twice a week at the busiest of times, we were sending out reminders and updates and positive messages to our volunteers to keep them positive when they're talking to the callers. And so that bulk text service has also meant that we now keep in touch with our volunteers to enable them to remind them when they're on duty, and make sure that they then have a way of getting back to us.
And then some years ago, we did a number of things. We changed our name from Senior Helpline to Senior Line, because we discovered that a lot of people felt, oh, I need a real big problem, I need help, or I'm okay, I don't need, I don't want to kind of portray myself as a helpless person needing help. So people were looking at Helpline from both ends and finding something negative about it. So we changed it just to Senior Line. If we're maybe starting again, we'd call it the very empathetic, effective listening line, because we're all about the way we listen to people. And then, so we changed the name, and that was a very positive thing. And then the other thing we did was very relevant to our audience in Dublin, is that we closed our centres down around the country. Very sad, but we managed it really well. A lot of faithful still volunteers, and we opened in Dublin. We opened with 3 centres in Dublin, in City Centre, in Donnybrook, and in Leopardstown. And so we've been managing in Dublin ever since. And now, since COVID, we've kind of changed to our volunteers have all been working from home. So, and their commitment has been absolutely fantastic in working from home. And paradoxically, in some ways, we're more in touch with them than ever. But we'll tell you more about that.
So everything's gone online, really. And what that's meant for the service is that, I suppose, we'll probably talk about in a minute about looking ahead, about how the service is going to look, and has started to look already, where we've a number of volunteers working from home, and instead of filling out a form and sending it back, they're filling out a form and taking a picture of it and sending it to us by WhatsApp or a text. And it's really speeded up the whole aspect of responding to our callers' needs, where something can now be picked up. If we're seeing a trend in something, a run on people being concerned about the price of gas and electricity, we can see that almost immediately now, whereas we would have waited in the past until a week later when we get our reports back, and they're a wee bit behind the time then.
So after our initial volunteer training, we continue to support our volunteers, because that's very, very necessary. And we do it in a number of ways. We have a regular newsletter that goes out all the time. We have continuous professional development for our volunteers. So every month we bring in a speaker to talk to our volunteers, and we choose somebody who's going to be of value both professionally and personally. So we might have somebody, over the last few weeks we've had a speaker from Friends of the Elderly in Dublin, a lovely organisation. And a lot of what I was so interested in is all the services they have, and what in some ways they mirror ours, in some ways they're different. So that was so interesting for our volunteers. And then the time before that, we had a new service talking to us. An organisation called Age Friendly Ireland has a number of coordinators now around the country, and they're going into people's homes and they're taking an assessment of their needs in terms of how their homes can maybe be upgraded or retrofitted, or how future-proofed, I believe is the word, future-proofed. and also how to help the older people engaging in their own community. And these coordinators have a lot of referral, have a lot of power, a lot of channels they can work with those older people. So it's a lovely service. And we wanted our volunteers to know for themselves, because they're older people, but we also wanted them to know, because an awful lot of our callers to Seniorland would be very interested in hearing about this. So it was win-win with that kind of CPD.
I suppose as a result of COVID, we had difficulties, like many organisations around the country, not just charity, I'm sure a lot of commercial ones as well, in maintaining our premises, which we held on to for best part of 2 years and paid money rental without actually using them. And at all times we kept, communicating with our volunteers, would you like to come back? And there was a time when we thought we were going to, and then COVID took a turn and paid sort of, paid whatever to that. So we ended up having to release our premises in January of this year. So now, I suppose longer term, we're looking to get permanent premises for Seniorland, which is something we've been looking for a long time, with space for doing what we need to do, the training, having our helpline booths, toilet facilities and all of that. And generally we always look for places in a good network, travel network, so that people can get there with the travel passes, which many of our volunteers have. And finally, I suppose what we want as a service is to gain wider recognition as a primary care provider, because what we do has been known to be very important for the older people in this country. And it's part of a holistic approach to older people. They don't all just need physical stuff. There's the whole mental aspect that needs looking after too.
So we're delighted to be part of the PPN. It gives us another kind of arm into the community. The fact that we've moved to Dublin recently, it's so right as well. And finally, the PPN bring out a newsletter regularly. It's absolutely brilliant. It keeps you in touch with what's going on. It gives me great ideas for promoting Seniorland to other organisations and vice versa. So thank you, PPN.